Fine. For class 11, we once again take up section B, of which question number 1 has been taken up. That means important ideas have been, you've been posted with important ideas regarding question 1. Now we take up writing skills per se, question number 2 and 3. That is question number 2 comprising letter or letters, and question number 3 will either be a debate or speech or report, etc. Now you must understand one thing: the letters in class 11, that is in class 11 as also in class 12, they carry 6 marks, and if the question carries 6 marks, it should be, the word limit is 120 to 150 words, and if it carries 8 to 10 marks, it should be from 150 to 200 words. 200 words. Now today we discuss again, writing skills can't be taught online. This comes through practice. Writing skill, any kind of writing, whether it be it drafting letters or writing articles or speeches, it basically means that you pick up relevant phraseology. Writing basically means picking up relevant phraseology. Only then will one be able to write. It basically means picking up relevant phraseology. Phraseology. Now where do I pick up phraseology? I read business letters, I get relevant phraseology. That means chunks of words, groups of words stuck together, and I remember the context and I make use of these when I write a relevant letter. Same is the case with writing report, articles, speeches. I must be open to picking up relevant phraseology. What particular phrase has been used in what context to describe what. So that is what I must keep my mind and my eyes open to. So the first thing that we come is writing letters. And now letters may be based either on verbal input that we are used to or visual input. That is important. So the letter may be based on the visual or verbal input. Now visual or verbal input. Visual or verbal input, it said verbal input. Visual or verbal input, this is what is. Oh my goodness, what is this? Visual or verbal input. Letters is what we are talking of. It can be based on visual or verbal input. Now if input, when we say input, it basically means guidelines, and if the question has guidelines, input basically means guidelines. If the question has guidelines, then whether it be a letter or it be a report or an article or a speech, it becomes a totally different exercise. It becomes an exercise in amplification. It becomes an exercise in modulation, and it becomes an exercise in rearrangement. So if guidelines are given, that simply means I have to make use of, it's compulsory It's compulsory for me to make use of all guidelines. It is compulsory for me to make use of all guidelines if guidelines are given. If guidelines are given, it's compulsory, absolutely essential for me to make use of all guidelines. Otherwise, marks would be deducted, because marks for content would be this is amplification. Amplification. Modulation and rearrangement is what I've told you. A question, if it is supported by guidelines, amounts to. That means I have to first, that simply means one, I have to make compulsory to use all guidelines. Compulsory to use all the guidelines. Second, amplification means expanding or adding facts. Adding facts, or what is meant by what I do when I elaborate. All right, that is amplification. Second thing, modulation. Now modulation means adding more facts to important guidelines as compared to the other guidelines. All right, and the last bit is rearrangement. Last bit is rearrangement. That means I'm free to reshuffle the guidelines. I'm not at all bound to expand the guidelines in the order in which they occur in the question. So I may begin the last guideline. I am free to reshuffle the guidelines. Free to reshuffle the guidelines. Free to reshuffle the guidelines. That is, if guidelines are given in the question. And these days examiners do present guidelines. Now, important thing is modulation. Now guidelines would be, and it is modulation that makes it compulsory for students to make use of all important guidelines. Now, all the guidelines present there, some of them would be important and some of them would be lesser important. So I have to add more facts to important guidelines. That is what modulation means. And because there are important guidelines and less important guidelines, and all guidelines have to be expanded, and I have to add more facts to important guidelines and less facts to less important guidelines. Therefore, it boils down to the first. That means it is compulsory for me to include all the guidelines. That is, to elaborate all the guidelines. Now, as I said, whether it is writing letter or it is writing articles or speeches, it is the question of relevant phraseology. Question of relevant phraseology. Relevant phraseology. Now, where do I pick up this? Where do I pick up this from? And this will invariably come from reading, nothing else. No, there is no substitute for me to be able to write a good letter, a good article. Then there is no substitute than to be able to read ready-made articles and speeches. It would be better if I inculcate the habit of reading newspapers on a regular basis, reading editorials, reading letters therein, reading business letters, and all business letters are formal. And this brings me to a very important question. The difference between yours faithfully and yours sincerely.